Hello, my friend, and welcome to a quiet journey into the northern world. Tonight, I invite you to sit back, breathe slowly, and let your mind drift with the wind of the far north. This is the beginning of our long voyage through the Viking story. But before ships, before steel, before distant shores, there was only land, sky, water, and silence. And in that silence, a people was shaped. A people who learned to live with cold, darkness, and endless horizons. A people who did not begin with war, but with the simple will to survive. Let us begin where every Viking life began. In the mist, in the cold, in the ancient breath of Scandinavia. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine yourself standing at the edge of a northern fjord. The morning air is still. The world feels half awake. A thin line of pale sunlight stretches across the sea like a whisper of gold. The water below you is dark and deep, moving with slow, patient waves. Behind you rise mountains older than memory, carved by ice, shaped by storms, standing like silent guardians over the land. These mountains are steep, narrow, and jagged, as if the earth itself were reaching upward for the sky. Snow settles in their cracks, even in summer. The wind slips through the stone like a voice. This is the land that raised the Viking people, a land of quiet strength, a land that offers little softness. In winter, darkness lingers for long weeks. The sun drags itself above the horizon for only a few hours, glowing faintly like an ember in a dying fire. Children grow up knowing the shape of night almost better than the shape of day. The cold is not merely a season here, it is a companion. It breathes through wooden walls and settles into the bones. It demands preparation, discipline, and respect. In the far north, nature is not an enemy nor a friend. It is simply a truth you must learn to live beside. And because life was not easy, the people grew resilient. They learned to stand firm like the pines that cling to cliffs. They learned to bend like birch branches under snow. They learned to endure storms with silent patience. The sea was everywhere around them, a constant presence, a wide, shifting mirror of gray and silver, sometimes gentle, sometimes merciless. It shaped their days, their work, their fears, and their dreams. Waves carved the coastline into narrow inlets called fjords. Long and deep, dark and cold. The fjords were doorways, guiding the people toward the world beyond. But they were also walls, trapping villages between water and mountain. To live here was to learn that the sea could be both path and prison. When storms rolled in from the North Atlantic, the sky darkened suddenly. Winds roared against the cliffs. Rain struck the water like arrows, and the sea rose as if trying to swallow the earth. People in these lands did not live lightly. They depended on the sea for food, yet feared its strength. They depended on the land for shelter, yet knew its stubbornness. They depended on each other for survival, yet understood that life could be taken swiftly by cold or hunger. Because of this, families grew close. Villages became like a single heartbeat. Every person had a role. Every hand mattered. Every life was woven tightly into the lives around it. There was no space for weakness, but there was always space for courage. And in this mysterious balance between harshness and beauty, the Viking people found their shape, not as warriors yet, not as explorers, but simply as survivors. Imagine a small wooden house, standing alone on a hillside overlooking the sea. Smoke curls softly from its roof. Sheep wander across rocky grass. A woman carries firewood inside. A child gathers berries under a pine tree. Somewhere, a man mends a fishing net with patient fingers. This is where the Viking story truly begins. Not with battle, not with conquest, but with a quiet morning like this, with daily work and simple needs, with warmth earned through effort, with food gathered from a stubborn soil. The world often remembers Vikings as fierce raiders, but long before they ever set foot on foreign sands, their lives were shaped by cold wind and hard earth. They were children of the North, and the North taught them everything. It taught them that nothing comes easily. It taught them that nature does not negotiate. It taught them that strength is not loud. Strength can be silent, enduring, patient. Strength can be the ability to rise each morning and do the same work again, even when winter is long and hope is thin. Strength can be the choice to face another day with steady hands. Strength can be the willingness to survive when survival is not guaranteed. This is the foundation of the Viking spirit. A spirit built from struggle, but also from wonder. Because despite its roughness, the North held a beauty unlike anywhere else. Mountains glowing rose gold at sunrise, frozen lakes shining like mirrors, auroras dancing like green fire across winter skies. The people looked at these sights and felt both small and infinite. They lived close to the natural world. They felt its rhythm. They feared it, respected it, and loved it. And this connection, the deep, quiet bond between human and land, created a culture unlike any other. A culture that understood the value of bravery. A culture that honored the strength found in nature. A culture that believed every stone, every tree, every flame held a story. This belief shaped their myths, their rituals, their identity. But before gods rose in their imagination, before sagas were spoken beside firelight, before sails were raised against the sky, there was simply the land. And the land made them strong. The North is not a place for the faint-hearted. The soil is thin, the winters are long, the storms are wild. And yet, generation after generation, the people stayed. They built homes from timber. They carved pathways from stone. They learned to read the sky and the sea. They grew into their environment the way roots grow into earth. It was this bond, this deep, ancient belonging that shaped who they became. Think of a young boy standing by the shore. He watches the waves rise and fall. He listens to the wind whisper across the water. His world is small, but it feels enormous. He sees mountains he cannot yet climb. He sees oceans he cannot yet cross. But he feels something inside him, something stirring, something curious, something brave. The land has planted a seed in him. One day, he will take a boat into the open sea. One day, he will seek new shores. One day, he will be called a Viking. But not today. Today, he is simply a child of the North. And this is where our story begins. The seasons in the North are not gentle, and they do not move quietly. One season arrives with force, and another leaves without warning. Summer is brief, but when it comes, it brings long days that seem to stretch into eternity. The sun lingers above the horizon, glowing softly through the night, painting the sky in silver and gold. Children play outside, even when it feels like midnight. Farmers hurry to tend their fields, knowing every hour of light must be used. This short burst of warmth is precious, and it feels like the world is finally breathing again. But summer in the North is not lazy. It is a season of urgency, of movement, of gathering. People cut hay, repair roofs, prepare food for the coming winter. They know the warmth will not stay. The land teaches them to appreciate what is temporary. The sea becomes calmer in these months, its surface shimmering like polished metal. Fishermen push their boats into the water before dawn, listening to the sound of oars dipping into the stillness. They travel along the fjords, searching for cod and herring. Every catch, big or small, is valuable. The sea provides, but it does not promise. When autumn arrives, it does so quietly at first. The air cools, leaves turn gold, then brown. Winds grow stronger and sharper. Birds circle above the water, preparing to fly south. Families gather wood, stock food, mend clothing, and make sure livestock are sheltered. They work with a sense of calm acceptance. They have done this for generations. Then winter comes like a curtain falling. Darkness stretches across the sky for months. Snow covers the land in a thick, soft blanket. The world becomes still, but the stillness is heavy. The cold sinks into every corner, every room, every breath. This darkness shapes the mind. It teaches patience, reflection, and endurance. It creates silence so deep that even the smallest sound feels meaningful. Families huddle around fires, sharing stories to pass the long nights. Grandparents speak of ancient kings and wandering spirits. They speak of gods who walk the skies and creatures who live beneath the earth. The stories remind everyone that they are part of something larger than themselves. Winter is hard, but it is also sacred. It invites people to listen to each other, to remember who they are, to understand why they must be strong. The land demands strength, but it also gives clarity. In the quiet of winter, you can hear your own heartbeat. You can feel the slow, steady rhythm of life beneath the snow. And when you listen deeply, you can almost hear the voice of the North itself. A voice that whispers, survive, endure, grow. This voice shaped the Viking people long before they built ships. To live here, they had to adapt. They had to use their minds as much as their hands. They learned to craft warm clothing from wool and fur. They learned to build long houses strong enough to withstand storms. They learned to store food in ways that would last the entire winter. Necessity shaped invention. Hunger shaped discipline. Cold shaped courage. And over time, this courage became part of their identity. A Viking child was taught not to fear the night. They were taught to walk through snow with steady steps. They were taught to respect the sea, the wind, and the unseen forces of the world. They grew up knowing that life was fragile and that every day mattered. This understanding of fragility made them fierce in a quiet way. Not fierce in anger, but fierce in purpose. They learned to trust one another deeply. Families depended on each other to survive. A neighbor's misfortune was a shared burden. One broken roof or one lost harvest could mean hunger for many. Because of this, every small act of kindness mattered, helping mend a fence, sharing a pot of stew, keeping watch during a stormy night. These simple acts built strong bonds. The community became the shield that protected each person from the harshness of the world. This closeness shaped their sense of loyalty, a loyalty that would later guide them across oceans, a loyalty that would make them stand beside each other in distant lands. Before they were explorers, they were caretakers of their own people. They carried warmth within themselves because the world around them was cold. As the years passed, generations grew up under these conditions. Each generation learned the same lessons from the land. Each generation added its own strength to the story of the North. Children listened to stories told by their elders and felt pride blossom in their hearts. They wanted to be brave. They wanted to be strong. They wanted to be worthy of the land they lived on. This desire shaped their character. Even before they touched a weapon or stepped onto a ship, they were already becoming Vikings in spirit. The land forged them like iron in a slow, steady fire. And when spring finally arrived each year, it felt like a gift. Ice melted, streams began to run, birdsong returned to the forests. The world awakened gently. People stepped outside their houses and breathed air that felt new. This moment, the first true sunlight after months of darkness, felt almost holy. It reminded them that every winter ends, that every hardship passes, that life continues. This rhythm of the seasons shaped their understanding of the world. They believed everything moved in cycles: life, death, rebirth, light, darkness, light again. This belief would influence their myths, their rituals, and their way of seeing fate. But at the root of it all was the land. Always the land. The land was their first teacher. It gave nothing freely, but it taught them how to live with strength and grace. And through this long, quiet struggle for survival, a remarkable people began to take shape. A people who would one day travel farther than anyone imagined. A people who would carve their names into the history of many nations. But before all of that, they were simply children of the North, carrying the lessons of wind, stone, water, and night. This is the beginning of who they were, and the beginning of who they would become. To understand the Viking people, we must understand the silence they grew up with. Silence was not empty in the North. It was alive. It held the creaking of pine trees shifting under snow. It held the distant crack of ice breaking on a frozen lake. It held the soft hooves of reindeer moving across white plains. It held the deep, slow breathing of the earth itself. And in that silence, the people listened. They listened to weather changing hours before it arrived. They listened to the sea and knew when storms were hiding behind the horizon. They listened to the wind and recognized when it carried danger. This listening became a way of life. It sharpened their senses. It strengthened their intuition. It made them aware of things most people would never notice. Children grew up learning how to read footprints in snow. They learned how to tell the depth of a fjord by the color of the water. They learned how to hear the difference between a gentle breeze and a wind that warned of terrible storms. This sensitivity to nature did not make them fragile. It made them wise. It taught them to respect forces larger than themselves. It gave them humility, the kind that comes from living so close to the raw power of the natural world. Humility did not weaken them. It kept them alive. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. The sky is pale and quiet. The water rolls below like a slowly breathing creature. A figure stands near the edge, wrapped in wool and fur. They lift their face toward the breeze and close their eyes. They are listening, not to a voice, not to a sound, but to the land itself. Because in the North, the land always speaks, through wind, through water, through silence, and people learn to answer with their actions. When storms came, they fortified their homes. When winter grew harsh, they shared food. When the sea froze, they traveled across it like a road. Every challenge was met with calm understanding. The calm did not come from fearlessness. It came from acceptance. They understood that the North would never change for them, so they chose to change for the North. This acceptance shaped their hearts. It shaped their relationships too. Love in the North was quiet, steady, and built from shared labor. Partnerships were formed not only from affection but from trust. Two people could not survive a winter together unless they moved as one. They needed each other. They relied on each other. A bond built from survival became unbreakable. In these lands, strength was measured differently. Strength was not loud. Strength was not violent. Strength was the ability to remain gentle in a harsh world. Strength was the ability to rise each morning to do the same work again. Strength was the decision to endure without complaint. This quiet strength was the essence of the Viking spirit long before they ever lifted a sword. The people also learned another kind of strength, the strength of community. Villages were small, often only a handful of families. When one family faced misfortune, a broken roof, lost livestock, a failed harvest, the others came together to help. Not out of charity, but survival. Everyone understood that a single weakness could endanger the entire village, so they supported each other naturally, without hesitation. A shared meal could mean the difference between hope and hunger. A repaired fence could prevent disaster. A warm blanket passed from one household to another could save a life. These acts wove the community together like threads in a tapestry. And from these threads came a deep sense of belonging, a belonging that gave them confidence to explore the world later in life. because no matter how far they traveled, they carried their homeland within them. The sound of wind across the fjords stayed in their memory. The smell of pine forests lingered in their breath. The steady comfort of their longhouses warmed their hearts. They could cross oceans without fear because they knew where they had come from. They knew what had shaped them, and they knew that whatever they encountered in distant lands, nothing would ever be as demanding as the North. This belief gave them courage. It gave them purpose. It gave them a sense of destiny. But destiny does not appear suddenly. It grows slowly, like moss on stone, covering everything with quiet persistence. And as the Viking people grew, destiny grew with them. They began crafting stronger tools. They began building better homes. They began experimenting with small boats and then larger ones. Necessity pushed them forward, but curiosity guided their direction. They wondered what lay beyond the mountains they could not cross. They wondered what lay beyond the water they could barely see across. They wondered about distant lands they had never visited but often heard whispers of. Freedom, opportunity, mystery, these ideas echoed in their minds like distant thunder. And the North encouraged these thoughts, not with promises, but with silence. The kind of silence that inspires questions. The kind of silence that makes a person dream of movement. The kind of silence that makes a person realize that the world is larger than they once believed. It is in this silence that the first seeds of exploration were planted, not in violence, not in greed, but in curiosity and necessity, two forces that shaped every Viking life. Even before they raised sails, they felt the call of the horizon. Even before they touched distant shores, they imagined what might lie beyond the reach of their fjords. The world beyond seemed full of shadows and wonders, beautiful, dangerous, endless, and the people of the North felt something inside them awakening, a desire to move, to seek, to understand, to survive not only within their own land, but beyond it. But before they could venture outward, they had to master their own world. They had to learn from the mountains, the seas, the storms, and the seasons. They had to become the kind of people who could endure anything. And the North, slowly and patiently, made them into exactly that. It shaped them like stone shaped by wind. It carved them like cliffs carved by waves. It forged them like metal forged by fire. They became strong because they had no other choice. They became brave because fear alone could not keep them alive. They became adaptable because the land demanded it. And without realizing it, they were preparing for the greatest journeys in history. Journeys that would take them across oceans. Journeys that would connect worlds. Journeys that would carve their name into time itself. But for now, they were still here, in the quiet North. Still listening. Still learning. Still being shaped by the slow, steady rhythm of their homeland, and the mist that wrapped around their mountains held the promise of everything they would one day become. As winter loosened its grip and spring returned, the people of the North stepped into a world renewed. Snow melted into streams that wound gently through valleys. Birds returned to the forests, filling the air with soft calls. Light grew stronger each day, lifting spirits and warming cold bones. This cycle of darkness and light shaped the Viking people in quiet but powerful ways. It taught them that life could rise from hardship. It taught them that patience would always be rewarded. It taught them that the world, even in its harshest moments, would eventually open again. This rhythm carved resilience into their souls. It threaded hope into their hearts. It whispered that survival was not only possible but meaningful. Springtime also brought new work. Fields needed to be cleared, boats repaired, animals tended. Children laughed as they ran across damp grass for the first time in months. The earth smelled fresh, almost sweet. It was a time of renewal, and everyone felt it. In these months, families traveled short distances to visit neighboring settlements. Paths that had been covered in snow now opened like gentle invitations. People shared news, traded goods, and greeted each other with warm smiles. Though distances were far and villages were scattered, connections between them were strong. They relied on each other to survive, but also to understand themselves. When people gathered, they exchanged stories passed down through generations. These stories were the beating heart of northern culture. They spoke of ancient ancestors who tamed wild lands. They spoke of brave men and wise women. They spoke of heroes who faced storms, spirits, beasts, and the unknown. Around every fire, these tales came to life. A child might hear them for the first time, awestruck by the courage of those who came before. An elder might listen quietly, remembering the lessons each tale carried. Stories were not merely entertainment. They were guidance. They were warnings. They were comfort. They held the wisdom of centuries. And in a world where death often came suddenly, stories gave meaning to life. They reminded people that every hardship had been faced before. They reminded them that they were part of something ancient and enduring. This deep sense of heritage strengthened their identity. It gave them roots, even when they would later travel far from home. In spring and summer, families also worked on their longhouses. These homes were more than buildings. They were sanctuaries. The walls were lined with thick planks of timber. Roofs were covered in turf that held warmth like a blanket. Inside, fires glowed softly, filling the room with gentle orange light. The smell of wood, smoke, and wool created a sense of belonging. On stormy nights, the longhouse felt like the center of the world, a place where stories echoed warmly, a place where families gathered close, a place where life felt safe, even when the wind howled outside. Children played with wooden toys carved by their parents. Mothers wove cloth on large looms, their hands moving with practiced grace. Fathers shaped tools, sharpened blades, or fixed nets. Every task held purpose. Every movement held care. This was the quiet foundation of Viking society. Not war, not conquest, but the slow, steady work of living. Living with intention, living with respect, living with the weight and wonder of nature. The forests around their villages played a large role in their lives. Tall pines and birch trees formed protective walls of green. Children learned to walk softly on forest paths, listening for rustling branches. Hunting parties ventured deep into the woods in search of deer, elk, and birds. They moved with careful steps, guided by instincts sharpened over centuries. The forest was a place of both nourishment and mystery. It held food, fuel, and shelter. But it also held legends of spirits, hidden beings, and ancient powers. People respected the forest deeply. They believed that the land itself watched them, that every tree had a history, that every grove had a guardian. Because of this belief, they entered the woods with humility. They took only what they needed. They treated the land with caution and gratitude. The sea, too, was treated with reverence. Fishermen rose before dawn, rowing into calm morning waters. Their breath formed mist in the cold air. The sound of oars dipping rhythmically into the sea felt like a steady heartbeat. Sometimes the water glowed under the early light, soft and silver. Sometimes it was dark and heavy, warning of storms. No one spoke loudly on their boats. They listened to the rhythm of waves. They watched the sky for signs. They trusted their instincts, passed down through generations of seafarers. The sea demanded courage, but it also offered freedom. It carried them to neighboring villages. It brought them fish that fed entire families. It offered possibilities, mysteries, and dreams of distant shores. But for now, they did not sail far. They stayed close to home, close to the land that raised them, close to the waters that shaped them. Travel beyond the horizon would come later. Exploration would come later. But the seeds of that destiny were already growing quietly within them. For every child who watched the sea from the shore, a dream began to form. A dream shaped by waves, by wind, by stories whispered beside the fire. A dream of movement, a dream of discovery, a dream of becoming more than what they were. Yet even dreams were rooted in reality. Reality was their teacher. Reality was their guide, and the reality of the North was honest and unforgiving. It rewarded effort, it punished carelessness, it demanded both strength and softness. This balance shaped their character more deeply than any tale or tradition. It shaped how they saw themselves. It shaped how they saw the world. It shaped how they prepared for the journeys that would define their future. Everything in their lives, every task, every season, every hardship was preparing them for the day they would look beyond their fjords and wonder, truly wonder, what lay beyond. Preparing them for the moment when curiosity and necessity would rise together. Preparing them for the first step toward becoming a people known across continents. But before that transformation, they were simply people of the North, living quietly, living deliberately, growing slowly, like forests shaped by wind, becoming strong, like mountains shaped by ice. And beneath all of this quiet strength, destiny waited patiently. Destiny always begins in silence, and in the North, silence was everywhere. As the seasons turned and the years passed, the people of the North became deeply connected to the land that shaped them. Each moment of hardship became a lesson. Each challenge became a story. Each triumph, no matter how small, became a thread in the tapestry of their heritage. These threads wove together to form the quiet strength that defined them, strength born from cold mornings and long nights, strength born from listening to storms instead of fearing them, strength born from understanding the rhythm of nature. This strength would one day carry them across oceans. But for now, it held them firmly in place, firmly rooted in their homeland, firmly connected to the soil beneath their feet. To live in the North was to live with deep awareness, the awareness that life could change suddenly, that weather could shift without warning, that the sea could turn from kind to cruel in a single breath. This awareness created gratitude, a gratitude for warmth, for food, for family, for every sunrise that managed to break through winter clouds. Gratitude became woven into their days. It shaped their traditions. It shaped their gatherings. It shaped their rituals that honored the natural world. In the evenings, as the fires burned low and the wind pressed softly against the longhouse walls, families sat close together. The glow of the flames flickered across wooden beams and fur blankets. Children rested their heads on their mothers' laps. Elders closed their eyes, listening to the crackle of burning logs. Outside, snow continued to fall or rain tapped gently on the roof. Inside, all was warm, all was safe, all was at peace. In moments like these, people felt the fullness of their lives. Not grand, not easy, but meaningful. Every hardship made these soft moments even more precious. Every struggle made the warmth even sweeter. The Vikings were not hardened by violence at their start. They were softened by the love needed to survive. They learned to hold each other close because the world outside demanded unity. They learned to cherish each small happiness because winter took so much. They learned to honor their ancestors, their land, and their traditions because these were the anchors that kept them steady. This emotional depth is often forgotten when people imagine Vikings, but it was real. It was essential. It was the foundation of their strength. Before they ever set foot on faraway shores, they had walked long miles through snow. Before they ever raised a shield, they had raised children before the fire. Before they ever carved their names into history, they had carved their homes into frozen earth. And because of this, they knew who they were. They knew what they valued. They knew what they fought for. Not wealth, not glory, but survival, community, and the chance to build a life worthy of their ancestors. Imagine a quiet night near the end of winter. The sky is clear, and stars spill across it like scattered sparks. Auroras ripple softly, weaving green and violet curtains above the mountains. A lone figure stands outside the longhouse, wrapped in fur, watching the lights dance. The cold bites at their cheeks, but they do not move. They are thinking, dreaming, feeling the weight of the world and the pull of something beyond it. They know their land with a love that is deep and unshakable. But they also sense that the world is larger than this valley, larger than these mountains, larger than the sea they have always known. Something inside them stirs, a quiet longing, a curiosity born from countless seasons spent watching the horizon. They do not yet know where this longing will lead them. They do not yet know the distant worlds their children's children will one day see. They only know that the North has shaped them into people who are ready, ready for challenge, ready for hardship, ready for discovery. The same land that taught them patience now teaches them desire. The same land that held them close now whispers that it is time to begin looking outward. And so, as winter slowly fades and spring approaches once more, the people of the North feel themselves changing, not quickly, not dramatically, but quietly, like ice melting into rivers. Change begins with a thought, a dream, a whisper carried on the wind, a simple idea that life could extend beyond the familiar. And the Vikings, shaped by silence and strength, begin to imagine themselves stepping beyond the world they have always known. This imagination is the first spark, the spark that will one day ignite their great journeys, their explorations, their stories across oceans and continents. But here, in this moment, they are still only people of the North, still listening to the wind, still watching the sky, still learning from the land that created them, still gathering the quiet strength they will need for everything that lies ahead. Their world is peaceful for now. Their hearts are steady. Their roots run deep. And from these roots, the long branches of history will soon begin to grow. Branches that will reach far beyond the fjords, far beyond the forests, far beyond the cold horizon they have watched since childhood. This is where their story truly begins. Not with conquest, not with battle, but with the land that breathed life into them, the land that shaped their spirit, the land that whispered their destiny long before they understood it. And in that quiet northern mist, destiny waits, soft, patient, and ready. The story of the North does not end with the land. It continues through the people who lived upon it. People whose lives were shaped by wind, by stone, by sea, and by silence. In Chapter 1, we walked through their world. Now, in Chapter 2, we step inside their homes, into their families, into their daily rhythms, into the quiet rituals that made them who they were. Life in the North was defined not only by nature, but by the way people moved within it. And nowhere can this be seen more clearly than in the humble Viking farmstead. Picture a small cluster of wooden buildings nestled at the base of a hill. Smoke rises gently from the roof of the longhouse. Sheep gather in a fenced pen. A dog stretches lazily in the morning light. The sea shimmers in the distance, visible between rows of pine trees. This farm is both home and fortress, both workplace and sanctuary. It is the heart of Viking life. Most families lived far apart from their neighbors. Mountains, forests, and fjords separated them. Travel was possible, but not effortless. Because of this, the farmstead became a world of its own. Each member of the household, from the eldest to the youngest, had a role. The day began early, before the sun fully rose in summer, before the sky even lightened in winter. Inside the longhouse, the first sound of the morning was often the soft crackling of the hearth being stirred back to life. The hearth was the center of everything. It warmed the home. It cooked the meals. It dried wet clothes. It lit the darkness during months of winter. It was a place of stories and a place of safety. Around this hearth, families built their lives. A woman might bend over the fire, stirring a pot of porridge. A man might pull on woolen leggings and boots, preparing to check the animals outside. A child might rub sleep from their eyes and find comfort in a warm blanket. The air smelled of wood smoke, milk, wool, and the faint salt carried inland from the sea. Despite the harshness outside, the longhouse was warm and alive. Life here was steady and full. Families raised goats, sheep, cattle, and pigs. Their animals were essential. They gave milk, wool, meat, and hides. They were wealth. They were security. And caring for them was a daily, unwavering responsibility. In the early morning, men and women stepped out into the crisp air to tend the animals. They broke ice in the water troughs during winter. They herded sheep to new grazing patches during summer. They mended fences, cleaned stables, and watched for wolves lurking at the edge of the forest. Every task mattered. Every task was part of survival. Inside the home, the work continued. Women spun wool into thread using simple hand spindles. The rhythmic spin of wool became a soft, familiar sound in the longhouse. They wove heavy cloth on large wooden looms, creating blankets, cloaks, tunics, and tapestries. These textiles were not merely practical. They were expressions of skill, identity, and care. A well-made cloak could save a life during winter. A warm blanket could comfort a child through the darkest nights. In Viking society, women held immense power within the household. They managed the farm. They controlled the keys to every storeroom. They oversaw food supplies that needed to last through the entire winter. Women were the quiet architects of survival, while men often left to fish, trade, explore, or later, to raid. Women stayed behind to maintain the rhythm of life. The longhouse was their domain. Its order reflected their wisdom, patience, and strength. They brewed ale, they baked bread, they preserved meat, they dried fish, they prepared medicinal herbs, they raised children. They negotiated disputes within the household. They kept peace and structure during long months when storms made the world feel small and fragile. If the land shaped the Viking spirit, women kept that spirit alive. Children were raised within this environment of work, rhythm, and responsibility. But they were also raised in an environment rich with imagination. Before they could even walk, they heard stories. Stories whispered during winter evenings. Stories spoken by grandfathers with deep voices. Stories sung by mothers as they rocked babies to sleep. Stories murmured by older siblings while shaping wooden toys. These stories spoke of gods who wandered the world in disguise, of spirits living in forests, mountains, and rivers, of heroes whose courage shaped entire ages, of monsters, giants, and creatures hidden just beyond the edges of the known world. Children grew up hearing their names, Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, as easily as they learned the names of their neighbors. These were not distant divine beings. These were part of their world, part of their culture, part of their understanding of life. The stories carried lessons: patience, bravery, kindness, honor, respect for nature, respect for the unseen. As children grew older, they joined adults in the daily tasks. A 5-year-old might gather eggs from the chickens. A 7-year-old might help herd goats. An 8-year-old might learn how to spin wool. By adolescence, they understood the rhythm of survival completely. Yet, childhood in the North was not joyless, far from it. When the chores were finished, children ran freely across fields. They climbed rocks. They built small boats from scrap wood and floated them in streams. They played games with bones, stones, and sticks. They learned to swim in cold lakes and fjords. They learned to ride small, sturdy horses. They played mock battles with wooden swords. They practiced with bows and spears. Their games were reflections of the adult world they would soon enter. But they were games filled with laughter and imagination. During warm evenings, families gathered outside to enjoy the brief summer sun. Mead flowed. Music floated through the air. Flutes, harps, and drums created soft melodies that blended with birdsong. During the long winter nights, gatherings moved indoors. Families sat close together beneath thick blankets. Someone recited a saga. Someone else played a quiet tune. Someone carved a piece of wood by firelight. The world felt small but warm, quiet but full. The rhythm of Viking life was shaped by the seasons. Summer was movement. Winter was stillness. Summer was light. Winter was darkness. Summer was work. Winter was reflection. During summer, the days were impossibly long. The sun barely dipped below the horizon. People worked tirelessly fishing, repairing boats, building, harvesting, traveling, and gathering enough supplies for the cold months ahead. There was no time to rest, no room for laziness. Every hour mattered. Every minute had weight. The land taught urgency through the shortness of summer, but winter taught patience. Winter slowed everything. The sun disappeared early and returned late. Snow piled against doors. Ice sealed lakes and rivers. The wind howled across empty fields like a living creature. Work continued, caring for animals, mending clothes, carving tools, but it was quieter, slower, more grounded. Time moved differently in winter. People rediscovered each other within the longhouse walls. They learned stories they had never heard before. They sharpened old skills and practiced new ones. They reflected on the past and imagined the future. Winter built inner strength. Summer built outer strength. Together, they created people who understood balance. A Viking did not simply endure the world, they flowed with it. They followed nature's rhythm instead of fighting against it. This balance can be seen in everything they did. A woman weaving cloth matched her rhythm to the rhythm of her breathing. A man chopping firewood followed the rhythm of the forest. A child learning to fish learned the rhythm of the tide. A family preparing a meal worked in a rhythm that felt like a quiet song. Life itself became a form of music. A music created from necessity, beauty, patience, and unity. In this world, traditions were not written in books. They were lived. They were passed down from hands to hands, voices to voices, hearts to hearts. A mother teaching her daughter how to mix herbs for healing. A father teaching his son how to repair a fishing net. A grandfather teaching children how to tell stories by the fire. A grandmother teaching them constellations in the sky. These traditions shaped identity. They shaped destiny. They ensured that even as the world changed, the essence of who they were would endure. Inside each Viking family, there was a shared belief. A belief that everyone had a place. Everyone had value. Everyone was responsible for the well-being of the whole. This belief made their communities strong. It made their relationships meaningful. It made their survival possible. And it created the quiet bond that would carry them across oceans one day. Before they ever dreamed of distant lands, they built deep roots in their own soil. Before they ever held a sword, they held tools and children and stories. Before they ever sailed beyond the horizon, they learned the importance of home. Home was not merely a building, it was a circle of people, a bond, a promise, a memory carried in the heart. When Viking men later left to explore, trade, or raid, they carried the warmth of home with them. It burned in their chests like a beacon. It reminded them why they endured storms, hunger, danger, and uncertainty. It reminded them what awaited them across the sea. It reminded them who they were. The people of the North were shaped not only by the land but by love, quiet love, daily love, love expressed through labor, care, and presence, love that stitched families together with invisible threads. This love made them resilient, this love made them brave, this love made them human beyond the myths that would later surround them. So when we think of Vikings, let us begin here, not on battlefields, not on longships, but in the warm glow of a hearth, in the laughter of children, in the patience of women weaving cloth, in the quiet determination of men tending animals, in the steady rhythm of life on a northern farm, because this is where their story truly lived. This is where their strength began, and this is where the seeds of their future were planted. A future that would carry them far, a future that would shape history, a future that would echo across continents. But the roots of that future were always here, in the homes of the first people, in their traditions, in their family bonds, in their everyday acts of resilience and love, and in the gentle cycle of seasons that guided them through life. As we leave this chapter behind and prepare for the next, remember this: the Vikings did not rise suddenly. They grew slowly, patiently, quietly, from farms, from families, from stories beside the hearth, from the hearts of children who listened to the wind and dreamed of the world beyond the mountains. This is their beginning, and their journey has only just begun. The land shaped the Viking people, their families nurtured them, their stories gave them identity, but something even deeper lived within their hearts, something that guided them through storms, darkness, and the unknown. A quiet belief in forces larger than themselves, a faith woven into every moment of their lives, a sense that destiny was not something to fear, but something to meet with open hands. This was the Northern spirit, a spirit carried in myth, in ritual, in dreams, and in silence. To understand the Vikings, we must sit beside their fires at night. We must listen to the soft voices of storytellers. We must enter the world of their gods not as fierce beings of war, but as gentle companions on life's long path. Let us begin with the All-Father. Odin was not just a god to the Vikings. He was a presence, a whisper, a reminder that wisdom must be sought, not given. When winter winds moved across the mountains, people imagined Odin walking with them, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, wrapped in a long cloak, his one good eye calm and thoughtful. Odin was a wanderer, a seeker, a god who valued knowledge more than victory. He sacrificed his own eye to gain wisdom, and the Vikings saw this not as violence, but as devotion. The devotion to understanding, the devotion to knowing oneself, the devotion to seeking truth even when the path was painful. Parents told their children that Odin traveled the world disguised as an old man. He met farmers, fishermen, shepherds, and wanderers. He learned from them. He taught through gentle riddles. He offered guidance through quiet signs. He was the god of poets, dreamers, and thinkers. In the long winter nights, when people watched the flames dance in the hearth, they believed Odin watched with them, not from above, but from the shadows of the room, a calm guardian of thoughts. If Odin was wisdom, Freya was love. Not just romantic love, but the love that binds families, comforts children, and heals wounds. The love that feels like warm hands on cold skin. The love that makes winter bearable and summer radiant. Freya walked through fields of flowers in the stories. Her hair shone like the morning sun on golden grain. Her tears turned into amber when they touched the earth. She was the protector of the vulnerable, the listener of silent prayers, the gentle strength of women who held households together, the quiet fire within every heart that refused to go out, even in hardship. People prayed to her not with shouting, but with gratitude. They whispered her name when they needed courage. They thanked her when children were born healthy. They spoke to her when they missed someone they loved. And then there was Thor, not the loud warrior many imagine today. In the Viking world, Thor was protection. He was the sound of thunder rolling across the mountains, telling people that he was near. He was the god who walked among simple folk. The god who blessed farms, guarded travelers, and kept evil away. When storms shook the sky, children were told not to fear. That is only Thor, their mothers whispered. He is fighting for us. And so thunder became comfort. Lightning became reassurance. Storms became reminders that even the gods worked hard to keep the world safe. The Vikings did not worship their gods in fear. They loved them. They trusted them. They believed the gods understood what it meant to struggle, to hope, and to endure. These gods were not distant rulers. They were companions in the long journey of life. The people also believed in Valkyries not as terrifying spirits, but as gentle guides. Women of light who carried the fallen with tenderness, who touched their foreheads and whispered, "Your journey is not over. Come with us." This leads us to Valhalla, a place often misunderstood. Many imagine Valhalla as a hall of endless battle, a place of noise, blood, and roaring warriors. But to the Vikings, the idea was far softer. Valhalla was a continuation, a dawn after dusk, a place of reunion, warmth, and purpose, a place where those who lived bravely met again, not to fight endlessly, but to prepare for the final harmony between life and death, to learn, to grow, to rest. Death was not an ending, it was a doorway, a quiet threshold between one room and another, a shift in the journey, not the conclusion of it. For a Viking, death was not something to fear because life had already taught them how to meet darkness with steady hearts. They lived in a world where winter could take a life in a single night, where storms could devour a boat without warning, where sickness could come quietly and disappear as quietly. Because of this, they learned early that fear was a companion they could not allow to grow too large. They accepted death the same way they accepted winter, with understanding, with respect, with preparation, with the belief that beyond the cold season, another spring would come. They believed the soul traveled onward, that ancestors waited patiently across the threshold, that the gods welcomed the brave with open arms. And so the idea of Valhalla soothed them. It calmed their hearts during hardship. It gave them courage during storms. It allowed them to live fully because they did not cling to life with fear. This acceptance shaped their rituals, rituals that might seem unusual to us but were deeply natural to them. When someone passed away, the family did not scream or wail wildly. They moved slowly, gently. With respect, they washed the body with warm water. They dressed it in clean clothing. They laid it upon a bed of furs. They surrounded it with items that had meaning: tools, jewelry, weapons, or sentimental treasures. They lit candles. They sang softly. They spoke blessings. They shared memories that held the person close one last time. These rituals were not frightening. They were tender. A way of saying, "We love you. We honor your journey. Walk peacefully." And when the time came, they believed the gods themselves guided the soul to where it needed to go. Some souls went to Valhalla, some to Freya's gentle fields, some to quiet realms where ancestors lived. Each path was meaningful. Each destination carried purpose. This belief system gave the Vikings emotional strength that outsiders often misunderstood. Their calm in the face of danger did not come from brutality. It came from trust. Trust in destiny. Trust in the gods. Trust in the journey. This trust was reflected in their rituals of divination. Seeresses known as Volo were respected, not feared. They were women with deep intuition, women who listened to dreams, to symbols, to the quiet voice inside the human heart. They used staffs, runes, chants, and meditation to understand the patterns of fate. Their rituals were slow, gentle, like a long breath, like waves brushing the shore. People gathered around them in silence. They listened to the soft, rhythmic chanting. They closed their eyes and felt the presence of something greater. The seeress did not command fate. She only listened to it, interpreted it, and shared what she heard. Sometimes she warned farmers of a poor harvest. Sometimes she encouraged a young couple unsure of their future. Sometimes she comforted a grieving mother by reminding her that love did not end with death. Her words were not absolute, but they were comforting. These women held a sacred place in society because they connected the human world with the unseen one. To the Vikings, the unseen world was not frightening. It was simply another layer of reality, an extension of the forests, mountains, and seas they knew so well. They believed spirits lived in rivers and stones. They believed ancestors watched over their children. They believed dreams carried messages. They believed fate was a quiet wind moving through every life. And because they believed these things, their world felt full, held, protected. Even during storms, even during war, even during sorrow, something always guided them. The Viking people carried this belief gently. They did not build great temples. They did not carve endless dogma into stone. Their religion lived in stories, in the land, in daily rituals, in the soft breath of life itself. A simple sacrifice of grain, a whispered prayer before leaving on a journey, a carved symbol on a child's cradle, a blessing spoken before a meal, a song sung to the sea before fishing. These small acts created a spiritual world that felt intimate and real. Their faith was woven into everything, not separate from life, but part of it. This faith helped them accept uncertainty with grace. They believed that every person had a word, a destiny woven at birth. Not a fixed future, but a path shaped by choices, courage, and circumstance. Destiny was a thread. They were the hands that guided it. The gods were the weavers who held the loom. This idea filled them with both purpose and peace. It reminded them that their lives mattered, that their actions echoed beyond death, that their stories would be told long after they were gone. This belief shaped how they treated others, how they met hardship, and how they carried themselves across the world. When Viking men later sailed into distant seas, they did so with this faith in their hearts. When Viking women raised children, they did so with this understanding of destiny. When elders blessed young warriors or travelers, they did so with calm certainty. Their spirituality did not make them fearless. It made them brave. There is a difference. Fearlessness ignores danger. Bravery accepts it and moves forward anyway. The Vikings were brave, not because of weapons, not because of violence, but because of belief. Belief in themselves, belief in purpose, belief in the rhythm of life and death, belief that the gods walked beside them quietly, like friends. If you listen carefully to the wind across a northern fjord, you can almost feel this spirit, soft, steady, ancient. A reminder that life is more than what we see. A reminder that destiny is not heavy, it is gentle, like a hand guiding you through the dark. And this gentle guiding force shaped the Vikings from the inside out. It gave them the emotional strength to endure long winters. It gave them courage to explore unknown seas. It gave them the calm needed to face danger without panic. It gave them peace even in moments of uncertainty. This is the heart of their culture. Not violence, not war, but spirituality, connection, trust. As we leave this chapter, remember this. Before the Vikings changed the world with their journeys, their ships, and their courage, they were shaped by something quiet, something tender, something sacred. A belief that the world was full of meaning. A belief that destiny was a path to walk, not a weight to carry. a belief that death was not a wall, but a doorway, a belief that the gods were near, not in the sky, but in the wind, the fire, and the human heart. And with this faith, they were ready for everything that awaited them. The Norse shaped the Viking people. Their families nurtured them. Their gods guided them. But there was something else that carried them farther than mountains, forests, or stories ever could. Something made of wood, rope, wind, and the dreams of countless generations. A vessel that became more than a craft, more than a tool, more than a symbol. It became their soul. The Viking ship. To understand the Vikings, we must step onto one of these wooden vessels and feel the world as they felt it, quiet, cold, vast, filled with both danger and possibility. A Viking ship was not born suddenly. It was shaped slowly, with patience, wisdom, and deep respect for nature. Every plank carried a story. Every rope held purpose. Every nail whispered of generations of knowledge. Let us begin with the wood. The Vikings chose trees carefully. Not just any tree could become part of a ship. They walked through forests in silence, touching trunks, listening to the subtle creaks within the bark, feeling the strength of each tree. They sought oak for its endurance, pine for its flexibility, ash for its balance. They saw trees not as materials but as living companions. A shipwright placed his hand on a chosen tree and offered a quiet thanks. He understood that taking a tree was taking a life. The tree had endured storms, fed on soil, reached toward the sun. Now it would take to the sea. Now it would become a vessel for journeys beyond the horizon. Crafting a Viking ship was an art passed from father to son, from elder to apprentice. It was not written in books. It lived in hands, in calloused palms, in steady fingers, in long hours spent shaping wood while the wind whispered through the workshop. Shipwrights carved each plank with care. They bent them using steam and fire. They joined them with precision so that the hull flowed like the curve of a wave. They understood the language of wood. They listened when it resisted. They adjusted when it groaned. They honored its natural shape instead of forcing their own. This harmony between craftsman and tree created ships that were alive, ships that moved with the sea instead of against it, ships that could glide across calm water and also endure the wrath of storms. The ropes that held the ship together were braided by skilled hands. Made from hemp or walrus hide, they were strong and reliable. Each rope was tested, each knot tied with intention. In the Viking world, a weak rope could mean death, a strong one could mean survival. The oars were carved long and slender. They were smoothed until they felt like silk under the hands of rowers. Each oar was balanced so that it dipped into the water without resistance. When 40 men rowed together, it felt like the ship itself was breathing. The mast was raised slowly, like lifting a pillar toward the heavens. It had to be tall enough to catch the wind, but flexible enough to bend without breaking. The sail, woven from wool, was dyed with earthy colors, sometimes red, sometimes brown, sometimes striped like the wings of a falcon. When the sail unfurled, it cracked softly in the wind, like a heartbeat awakening. But the true wonder of the Viking ship was its shape, long, narrow, elegant, capable of slicing through waves with the grace of a swimming animal. The hull was built using a technique called clinker construction. Planks overlapped like scales on a serpent. This made the ship surprisingly light, so light that men could carry it across land when necessary, so strong that it could survive fierce seas. These ships were built not for one purpose but for many. They could navigate deep oceans. They could glide up shallow rivers. They could land on sandy shores without docks. They were freedom given form. To board such a ship was to step into a living creature. Imagine standing on the deck at dawn. The sky is pale. A thin mist glides across the water. The air smells of salt and morning cold. The wood beneath your feet is smooth, warm with the memory of hands that shaped it. The sea is calm, barely stirring, but you can feel the ship waiting, like a horse before a long ride, like a falcon before flight. Then the call goes out, a soft command, oars into the water. 40 men lean forward, their hands wrap around the wood, their muscles tighten, their breath steadies. And then, the first stroke, slow, powerful, silent, except for the soft splash of water. Dozens of oars enter and rise in perfect rhythm. The ship begins to glide, not with effort, but with ease, as if it knows the way, as if it has been waiting for this moment. When 40 men row together, the world becomes a heartbeat, the creak of wood, the whisper of oars, the distant cry of a seabird, the deep, steady breath of men moving as one. The rhythm becomes a lullaby, a calm pulse that carries the ship forward. You feel it in your bones, in your chest, in the soles of your feet. It is the sound of unity, the sound of purpose, the sound of destiny approaching gently across open water. Even when fog surrounds the ship, when the world becomes a soft gray blur with no horizon, the rowers do not slow. They trust their leader. They trust the sea. They trust the ship beneath them. Fog is silence turned to mist. It wraps around the vessel like a blanket. Oars disappear into a sheet of nothingness. The air feels still. Every sound becomes louder. Every breath becomes clearer. This is when the Vikings learn to listen with their whole being. They listen to the water hitting the hull. They listen to the direction of the wind. They listen to the distant cries of birds. They listened to the voice inside their own minds. They did not fear the fog, they knew it well. They had grown up with winter mists sliding across fields and forests. Fog was simply another element of their world. They navigated it with instinct. They could tell direction by the taste of the air, by the temperature of the breeze, by the way the ship gently leaned, by the whisper of currents below. And when the fog finally lifted, revealing open sky and rolling waves, the ship felt like it was waking from a dream. Beyond rowing, the Vikings had another gift, the ability to read the world. They read the stars, not with charts or instruments, but with memory, with reverence, with the understanding that the sky held ancient paths. On clear nights, men lay on their backs on the deck, staring upward. The stars shimmered like frost on black stone. They recognized constellations as if they were old friends. They knew which star pointed north, which cluster signaled land, which pattern marked the passing of seasons. The sky was their map, the sea was their road, the wind was their companion. They listened to the wind as others might listen to music, the tone, the strength, the direction. Each whisper meant something, a promise of calm, a warning of storms, a shift in fate. Their senses were sharpened by necessity, but also by desire, a desire to know the world, to understand it, to move through it with harmony instead of force. This harmony made them extraordinary sailors. They did not fight nature, they partnered with it. When wind filled the sail, the ship leaned gracefully. When waves rose, the hull flexed with them. When storms arrived, the ship danced rather than resisted. This is why Viking ships traveled astonishing distances, not through power alone, but through design, through understanding, through respect. No ship in their time could compare. While other cultures built heavy vessels, the Vikings built light, swift, elegant ones. Ships that could cross oceans and slip quietly into rivers. Ships that could outrun storms. Ships that could approach coasts silently, like shadows across the water. This made them a force unlike any other. The ship was not only a tool of exploration, it was a tool of connection. It linked distant lands. It linked families separated by fjords. It linked stories across continents. The Viking ship became the bridge between worlds. A young man stepping onto a ship for the first time felt a mixture of fear and wonder. He knew he was leaving behind safety. He knew he was stepping into the unknown, but he also knew he was stepping into destiny. The ship carried not only cargo and crew, but hopes, dreams, memories, courage, songs, stories passed down from elders who had once stood on similar decks. The sea tested them. It taught patience, discipline, unity, and humility. A storm could rise suddenly. Waves could crash over the side and soak everyone to the bone. Wind could tear at the sail like claws. Thunder could shake the sky. Lightning could split the horizon. In these moments, fear flickered in every heart, but courage burned brighter. Men gripped their oars. Others tightened ropes. Some prayed quietly to Thor. Others whispered to Odin. Everyone worked. Everyone focused. Everyone trusted the ship. Because if the ship lived, they lived. Storms were not enemies. They were teachers. Harsh, but honest. When the storm passed, relief washed over the crew like sunlight. They laughed. They whispered thanks to the gods. They touched the wood beneath them, as if greeting an old friend. And the ship sailed on. When the sea was calm, the world felt endless. The horizon stretched in every direction like a soft line drawn between sky and water. The ship moved gently. Waves lapped softly against the hull. Men rested. They ate simple meals. They shared stories. They remembered home. Some carved small runes into the railing. Some mended clothing. Some simply stared into the distance, letting the quiet fill them. In these moments, the ship felt like a cradle carrying them from one world to another. At night, when the moon turned the sea silver, the crew often fell silent. The ocean became a mirror, the sky a tapestry of stars, the ship a single heartbeat in the vastness. No one spoke loudly at night. Voices softened, thoughts deepened, dreams drifted across the deck like fog. A Viking ship at night was not a vessel of war. It was a place of reflection, a place where fears gently loosened, a place where the universe felt close enough to touch. This emotional and spiritual connection made the ship the heart of Viking culture. It was not only wood and rope, it was identity, it was home, it was destiny. Because with these ships, the Vikings were no longer limited by their rugged homeland. They were free, free to explore, free to trade, free to discover, free to change the world. The ship was their teacher, their protector, their companion, and in time, it became their legacy. When people today think of Vikings, they think of ships, long, narrow silhouettes gliding across cold seas, dragon-headed prows cutting through waves, sails full of wind, oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm. But the true soul of the Viking ship is quieter than these images suggest. It is found in the soft creak of wood beneath moonlight, in the warmth of hands that shaped it, in the rhythm of 40 hearts beating together, in the silent trust between man and sea, in the belief that the world was meant to be explored, in the courage to leave familiar shores, in the hope that beyond the horizon lay something worth finding. The Viking ship carried all of this. It carried life, it carried spirit, it carried destiny, and with every league it traveled, the Vikings grew closer to becoming the force history would remember. A force not built on brutality, but on craftsmanship, unity, courage, and the quiet understanding of nature. As we end this chapter, imagine the ship again, floating gently, the sail lowered, the stars above, the world silent, 40 men resting, the sea breathing, the ship dreaming of journeys yet to come. This is the soul of the Vikings, a wooden vessel in the midnight sea, a heartbeat drifting across the world. The Vikings were shaped by their land, strengthened by their families, guided by their gods, and carried by their ships. Now, in this chapter, we follow them as they leave the fjords behind, as they sail toward the unknown, as their wooden vessels drift across the cold North Sea and touch the shores of new worlds. This is the moment when their story begins to intertwine with the stories of other peoples, the English, the Franks, the Celts, the countless communities living along the western edges of Europe. But these encounters were not always battles. Often, they were much quieter. It begins with curiosity and with wind. The first time Viking ships approached the coasts of England, the sea was calm, the air was cool, mist clung to the water like soft fabric. From the decks of their longships, the Vikings saw something different from the rugged homeland they knew. They saw wide green hills, gentle rivers, villages clustered near fertile fields, smoke rising peacefully from homes made of timber and straw. The land looked generous, open, alive. It called to them. Before any blade was drawn, the Vikings came simply to see, to trade, to understand who lived beyond the horizon they had known all their lives. They brought furs from the north, amber that glowed like trapped sunlight, walrus ivory carved by careful hands, blades crafted by skilled smiths. They traded for cloth, grain, pottery, jewelry, and sometimes silver. The early encounters between Vikings and the people of England were often calm. People met on riverbanks. They examined each other's goods. They used gestures, simple words, or drawings on the ground to communicate. Curiosity moved between them like a soft breeze. Children peeked from behind older villagers, wide-eyed at the strangers with pale hair and weathered skin. Viking sailors smiled and offered small wooden carvings or beads. The villagers offered milk, bread, or cheese in return. Moments like these rarely appear in history books, but they happened quiet intersections of human life. Yet, peaceful contact was not always guaranteed. The Vikings did not grow up in a world of abundance. They knew hunger. They knew scarcity. They knew the cold bite of winter and the fear of an empty storeroom. So when they looked upon lands richer than their own, they understood the temptation. They understood the desperation that sometimes simmered beneath their voyages. Sometimes they came as traders. Sometimes they came as raiders. Sometimes they came as both. It is easy to imagine them as brutal from the start, but the truth is softer and more complex. The first violence often came not from desire, but from misunderstanding, from fear, from clashes of culture, from protection of land and family. Misunderstandings turned into skirmishes. Skirmishes turned into raids. Raids turned into stories retold with fear and exaggeration. And soon, word spread across Europe of northern men with wild eyes and iron axes. But even then, the Vikings did not raid at random. They chose their targets with quiet intelligence. They avoided strong fortresses. They avoided armies. They avoided places where resistance would be fierce and losses inevitable. Instead, they looked for rivers, waterways that acted like open doors into foreign lands. Rivers like the Thames, the Seine, the Loire, the Humber. Rivers that led deep into England and Francia, carrying their ships like arrows slipping through soft cloth. They landed at monasteries not because they hated religion, but because monasteries were undefended, quiet, peaceful, rich in goods meant for worship and trade. To the Vikings, these were stores of survival, not sacrilege. They saw wealth not as holy, but as the difference between life and hunger. Some places they visited only once, some many times, some they never touched, because the land did not welcome them, because the river was too narrow, because the shore was too rocky, because the people were too strong, because the resources were too small. In these decisions, we see the Vikings not as reckless raiders, but as strategists shaped by harsh reality. Still, as decades passed, their visits became more frequent. At first, the people of England were terrified. Stories grew, legends spread. Yet with each new encounter, the Vikings learned something, and so did the people they met. They learned each other's languages. They learned each other's customs. They learned where to approach with caution and where to approach with open hands. Trade increased. Relationships formed. Some Vikings married local women. Some settled peacefully. Some even protected the lands they once raided. This was especially true in the western coast of France, Francia. The Vikings loved the Seine River. It wound gently into the heart of the land. Along its banks were vineyards, towns, markets, and fertile soil. The Vikings saw opportunity. Their ships glided up the river silently at dawn. Villagers watched from the shore with a mixture of awe and fear. Tall ships with carved prows shaped like dragons or serpents. Sails billowing softly, oars dipping like wings of water birds. The sight felt otherworldly. At first, the Vikings came to trade, but Francia was divided then. Kings quarreled. Lords fought among themselves. Armies were scattered and disorganized. This made the land vulnerable. The Vikings did not create that vulnerability. They discovered it. Some Vikings plundered. Some settled. Some offered their swords as protection in exchange for land or silver. Some entered into agreements with local rulers, becoming mercenaries or allies. Slowly, the Vikings wove themselves into the political fabric of the region, not through force alone, but through negotiation, marriage, loyalty, and commerce. And so began one of the most important transformations in Viking history, the shift from raiders to settlers. A Viking who stepped onto foreign soil might one day become its farmer, its trader, its leader. In England, this transformation was profound. Entire regions came under Viking influence. Villages became mixed communities. Languages blended, names blended, traditions blended. People lived side by side. A Viking man might work the fields beside an English neighbor. A Viking woman might weave cloth using techniques learned from the locals. Children grew up bilingual, slipping effortlessly between two worlds. The North and the West meeting inside a single voice. In Francia, the transformation was equally remarkable. A Viking leader named Rollo accepted land from the Frankish king. In exchange, he pledged loyalty. He promised peace. He promised protection. This land became Normandy, the land of the Northmen, a place where Viking heritage flowed into French culture like a river joining the sea, a place where descendants of Vikings would one day cross the Channel and change the history of England forever. But long before that, the Vikings remained travelers, men of the sea, men searching for new worlds not only to claim, but to belong to. Their journeys along the western shores were filled with contrasts. Moments of violence, moments of peace, moments of fear, moments of curiosity, moments when raiders became guests, moments when strangers became neighbors. Imagine a Viking ship landing on a quiet English shore. The villagers gather cautiously. The air is filled with tension. A single Viking steps forward and places a small chest on the ground. Inside are furs, amber beads, simple ornaments. He gestures toward the villagers' baskets of grain and pottery. Slowly, carefully, they approach. They touch the goods. They exchange glances. And then, a trade is made. That simple moment, soft and silent, changed everything. Trust begins with one gesture. Friendship begins with one offering. Understanding begins with one shared need. Over time, these small exchanges built connections stronger than fear. Connections that reshaped the coastlines of Europe. The Vikings learned that strength did not always lie in taking. Sometimes it lay in staying, in building, in cultivating, in belonging. These coastal journeys taught them that the world was wide, not only in distance but in possibility. that life could grow in many places, that their destiny was not limited to the fjords of the north. Some Vikings never returned home. They built farms on English soil. They raised children by French rivers. They became part of the lands they once only visited. Their graves still lie there to this day, marked with stones, their names half forgotten, their legacy alive in the people who walk those lands. A Viking who began life as a fisherman in Norway might end life as a farmer in Normandy. A young man who dreamed of glory might find peace in a quiet village. A woman who crossed the sea with her husband might raise children who spoke a different language. This is the quiet truth behind the fierce legend. They were human, seeking safety, seeking opportunity, seeking home, and in their search they changed the world. The western shores of Europe were not passive in this story. They, too, shaped the Vikings. They softened them. They taught them new ways to live, new ways to farm, new ways to build, new ways to govern. The Vikings absorbed what they saw. They adapted, they blended, they reshaped themselves again and again. By the end of their voyages along the coasts of England and Francia, many Vikings had become something else entirely. Traders, negotiators, landowners, leaders, citizens of places far from their birth. Their ships brought them to these lands, but it was their ability to learn, to adjust, to connect, that allowed them to stay. As we close this chapter, imagine a quiet evening on a French riverbank. A Viking man sits with his English wife. Their children play in the grass. A longship rests at anchor nearby, but its sail is furled for good. The man watches the sunset and feels the weight of years. He remembers the north, the mountains, the snow, the long houses, the crackle of the hearth, the songs of his childhood. But he also feels something new: belonging, rootedness, home. The waves gently brush the shore. Birds circle overhead. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring softly. He closes his eyes. He exhales. He realizes that his journey was not about conquest. It was about becoming, about finding a place where his story could continue, where his children could grow, where peace could live. And in that quiet moment, he understands the true power of the Viking ship, not its speed, not its strength, but its ability to carry people toward new beginnings, toward new shores, toward new lives, toward the future. As the Vikings sailed farther along the western shores, the horizon opened into a new world, a world of mist, a world of green cliffs rising sharply from gray water, a world where sea, wind, and stone seemed to merge into one endless breath. Ireland, Scotland, and the islands scattered like stepping stones between them, Shetland, Orkney, and the Hebrides. These places would become more than destinations. They would become home. When Viking ships first reached the northern islands, the sea was quiet. The air held a soft chill. Fog drifted gently across the waves, cloaking the land like a veil. From the decks of their longships, the Vikings saw hills covered in heather, cliffs carved by ancient storms, and small settlements huddled near the water's edge. It felt familiar, yet different, wild, yet welcoming, lonely, yet alive. These were lands shaped by the same forces as their own: wind, cold, isolation, and stubborn resilience. The people who lived here were strong, toughened by harsh winters and rocky soil, gentle in spirit, yet fiercely protective of their kin. When Vikings arrived, there was tension, curiosity, fear, and fascination all intertwined. But something unusual happened on these islands. Something softer than war, something slower than conquest, something deeper than conflict. Here, the Vikings did not simply raid, they settled, and in settling, they changed, and were changed. The first islands the Vikings encountered were Shetland and Orkney. They were remote, wind-swept places where the sea shaped every hour of life. People lived in stone houses built low to the ground to withstand storms. Sheep grazed along rocky slopes, boats bobbed in sheltered coves, smoke drifted from hearths at dawn and dusk. Life here moved with the tides. The Vikings saw opportunity, not opposition. The islands were sparsely populated. They needed farmers, they needed fishers, they needed traders, and the Vikings were all of these things. When longships approached the shores, the islanders watched carefully. Some hid, some waited with weapons, some stepped forward in cautious greeting. But many were surprised to find that the strangers did not always arrive with fire and blade. They arrived with goods, with skills, with families, with dreams of building a new life. The Vikings were not only warriors, they were farmers, eager for rich soil. They were craftsmen searching for trade. They were sailors seeking safe harbors. They were families looking for stability. Shetland and Orkney offered all of this, so the Vikings stayed. They built longhouses beside stone cottages. They brought their tools and their customs. They introduced new ways of farming methods suited to harsh climates. They taught new techniques for building boats capable of handling the treacherous northern seas. But they also learned. They learned how the islanders fished in deep waters, how they followed bird migrations to find seasonal food, how they built with stone to withstand fierce winter winds, how they navigated fog using the cries of seabirds and the direction of swells. Slowly, quietly, two cultures began to blend. You could hear it in the language. Old Norse words slipped into local speech. Island words slipped into Norse. Children grew up bilingual without even thinking about it. They spoke a language shaped by sea and wind, a language that felt both ancient and new. You could see the blend in their art. The Vikings loved bold, swirling designs, dragons, serpents, knots without beginning or end. The islanders carved simple, strong motifs inspired by stone, animals, and nature. Together, these styles merged into something unique. Stone crosses with Viking patterns, jewelry combining Celtic spirals with Norse lines, carved bone pieces showing both worlds intertwined. Even hair carried the mark of blending cultures. Many islanders had dark hair, rich and deep like the earth. Many Vikings had pale hair, golden as dried grass, in winter sun. Within a generation, you could find people with every shade in between. Red hair glowing like fire under the mist. Brown hair streaked with lighter tones. Fair hair warming to honey in the sunlight. Their faces changed. Their customs changed. Their families changed. This was not conquest. This was a meeting of lives. The Vikings respected strength, and they found it in the islanders. The islanders respected skill, and they found it in the Vikings. Both groups valued hard work, community, and resilience. They had more in common than either expected. Life on the islands became a shared rhythm. At dawn, you could hear the bleating of sheep as people from both cultures led their flocks to graze. You could see men repairing boats together at the water's edge. You could hear laughter from children running along the rocky beaches. You could smell fish drying on wooden racks prepared using island techniques but hung on Viking-built frames. In the evenings, fires burned warmly inside longhouses and stone cottages alike. People shared meals of fish, stew, barley, bread, and seaweed seasoned with herbs. They drank ale and mead. They told stories, some told in Norse, some in Gaelic, some in a mix of both. They passed down myths and legends that began to merge in unexpected ways. A child might hear a story about Odin one night, and a tale about a Celtic sea spirit the next. And in their imagination, the worlds blended seamlessly. Odin walking along a misty cliff, a Celtic goddess appearing at a Viking hearth, a sea creature from local lore swimming beside a longship in the moonlight. This blending created something new. A shared culture shaped by fog, stone, and sea. The Vikings, who were once defined by movement, found stillness here. They found a home they did not need to leave. they built farms, they buried their dead, they carved runes into stones, and the islanders carved their names beside them. On Orkney, Norse place names appeared, names that still exist today, names describing bays, hills, and valleys in the language of the North. But just as many local names survived, carried through generations. This was not a story of replacement, it was a story of addition. The Vikings did not erase the people of the islands. They lived beside them, worked beside them, loved beside them, and eventually became them. Further south and west, the Vikings reached the coasts of Scotland and Ireland. These lands were different from the islands, larger, denser, more complex in culture and clan, but the Vikings approached them with the same mix of curiosity and caution. In Scotland, they settled along the northern and western coasts. They lived among the Picts and the Gaels. They traded wool, fish, and tools. They learned new words. They intermarried. They shaped the local culture as much as they absorbed it. In Ireland, the encounters were more varied. Some were peaceful, some were violent. But over time, Viking towns grew. Places like Dublin, Wexford, and Waterford. These began not as raids, but as trading ports. Safe harbors where merchants met, where fishermen sold their catch, where craftsmen shaped bone, metal, and amber. Irish monks recorded early conflicts, but they also recorded cooperation. They wrote of Viking leaders who protected local lands, of Viking craftsmen who worked beside Irish smiths, of Viking settlers who adopted local customs, of Irish families who married into Norse ones. The blending here was deeper than many realize. Irish art absorbed Norse patterns. Norse jewelry absorbed Celtic spirals. Irish names appeared in Norse sagas. Norse gods were spoken of alongside Irish saints. A child in Dublin might grow up hearing both languages, might wear a cloak woven with Irish dyes but fastened with a Viking brooch, might pray to Christ in a chapel but listen to tales of Thor by the fire at night. This was not confusion, it was coexistence. And coexistence required something more powerful than conquest. It required humility, patience, curiosity, respect. The Vikings were not always peaceful people. But in these lands, they discovered something beyond raiding. They discovered the richness of settling, the beauty of harmony, the strength of blending. Over the years, the Vikings did change the islands, but the islands changed them too. A Viking child born in Orkney might never see Norway. He might grow up speaking a mix of languages. He might learn island songs before Viking ones. He might feel the heartbeat of the North Sea differently, not as a barrier to be crossed, but as the water of home. On foggy mornings, the sea around Shetland and Orkney becomes a soft grey mirror. Ships appear and disappear like ghosts. Birds cry out through the mist. Waves whisper against the shore. In moments like these, the Vikings felt connected to everything, to their past, to their present, to their future, to the land they left behind, to the land they now called home, to the world of gods and the world of men, to the living and the dead. They understood that perhaps their journey was not just about finding new lands. Perhaps it was about finding themselves, finding peace, finding belonging. If you walk through Shetland or Orkney today, you can still feel them, in the shape of the land, in the rhythm of the waves, in the names carved into maps, in the stories told by locals, in the DNA carried quietly through generations. You can see it in the faces of islanders. Some have the dark hair of Celtic ancestors. Some have the pale hair of Norse lines. Some have both. All carry the history of blending, of meeting, of becoming. You can hear it in the language, a soft blend of sounds echoing across centuries, a reminder that cultures do not collide and break. They touch and change. They fold into each other like waves merging at sea. You can see it in the art and crafts of the islands, Norse knots entwined with Celtic curves, carved stones blending northern geometry with local myths, patterns that feel ancient yet living. The Vikings did not erase the cultures they met here. They helped them evolve. They absorbed them. They wove them into their own. And in doing so, they created communities unlike any other in Europe. These islands became a testament to what happens when people choose connection over domination, when they choose to build rather than burn, when they choose to stay rather than plunder, when they choose to understand rather than fear. This chapter of Viking history is often overshadowed by tales of war, but it is one of the most important, because it shows that the Vikings were not defined by conflict alone. They were defined by adaptability, by curiosity, by their ability to make a home wherever the sea carried them. As we close this chapter, imagine a quiet evening on the island of Orkney. A Viking man and an island woman sit beside a low fire. Their children play nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves. Above them, the northern lights ripple across the sky. The night is calm, the world feels both ancient and new. The man looks out across the sea. He remembers the fjords of his birth. He remembers the stories of his ancestors. He feels the pull of the north, always present. But he also feels the warmth of this land, the touch of this place, the comfort of belonging. He realizes that his journey has brought him here for a reason, not to conquer, not to rule, but to live, to love, to build, to become part of something larger than himself. And in the soft glow of the fire, with mist drifting gently across the sea, he smiles, because he understands that he has found home. In the misty islands of the West, the Vikings learned how to settle, how to blend with new cultures, how to build homes woven from both old traditions and new beginnings. But the sea, as always, whispered to them of greater horizons. And whispers have a way of becoming calls, calls that stir the heart, calls that lead a people toward places they never imagined. From the quiet shores of Orkney and the green hills of Ireland, their journeys soon stretched toward a different direction, east, into lands shaped not by open ocean, but by winding rivers, into worlds of forests, snowfields, and vast distances. This new chapter of Viking life began on the Baltic Sea, a sea calmer than the North Atlantic, but no less mysterious. A sea whose waters carried reflections of deep forests and long winter nights. From the Baltic, the Vikings found pathways into the heart of Eastern Europe. They discovered rivers that acted like natural roads, wide, slow-moving, ancient. The Volga, the Dnieper, the Dniester. Each one wound through towering woods, past villages of Slavic peoples, past wild marshes and quiet lakes, toward the rich lands of the south. These rivers were alive with promise. Unlike the rugged islands of the West, the East offered something different. Trade, wealth, opportunity, a kind of prosperity that did not require raiding or conquest. As Viking ships slipped into the mouths of these rivers, the world changed around them. The air grew still. The water darkened like polished amber. Forests pressed close on both sides, filled with birdsong and the scent of pines. Villages appeared like small refuges among the trees. Smoke rising gently, people watching from the banks with quiet curiosity. The Vikings came as they often did, carefully, open-handed, willing to trade before taking up arms. And in these eastern lands, trading was not only possible, it was abundant. Here, they discovered goods that were rare in the north. Furs so soft they seemed to melt in the hand. Wax for candles used in distant churches. Honey thick and golden. Slaves captured by local tribes. And above all, silver. Silver coins from the Arab world. Silver jewelry crafted by Eastern artisans. Silver flowing into markets like rivers of moonlight. To the Vikings, who came from lands where metal was scarce and valuable. The East felt like an endless treasure, and unlike raiding the wealthy coasts of the West, trading in the East offered something far more desirable: safety, predictability, honor, and profit that did not rely on destruction. The Vikings soon realized something important. Raiding might bring sudden wealth, but trade brought steady wealth. Growing wealth, wealth that built communities instead of burning them. And so, many Vikings transformed. Their axes were still sharp, their shields still strong, but their hands now held scales, not torches. Their ships became caravans on water, their crews became merchants rather than raiders. The Slavs along the rivers called them Rus. Some say this name came from a word meaning the men who row. Others say it came from their homeland in coastal Sweden. Either way, the name remained, and from it, the land of Russia would eventually take its identity. The Vikings, now Rus, established trading posts along the rivers, small at first, then larger, then cities, places like Novgorod, Kiev, Smolensk. From these settlements, they controlled the flow of goods between the Baltic and the rich markets of the Byzantine Empire. They traveled south along the Dnieper until the river widened into the Black Sea. They crossed its dark waters under skies glowing with summer heat. They approached the walls of Constantinople, the greatest city they had ever seen. A city of marble, gold, mosaics, and towering domes that glittered like sunrise. To the Vikings, coming from wooden villages and cold seas, this city felt impossibly grand. It was said that when Rus envoys first entered the city, they were overwhelmed by the brightness of it all, by the splendor of the Hagia Sophia, by the markets so full they seemed endless, by music and color that felt almost otherworldly. Here, trade reached its peak. Here, Viking merchants exchanged furs, wax, honey, and slaves for silk, spices, wine, weapons, and treasure from across the ancient world. Here, they saw cultures older than any they had ever known, and from these encounters, they brought new knowledge home. But trade was not the only path open to them in the East. Some Vikings found service in the armies of foreign kings. Their courage, their discipline, their loyalty to those who paid them well, all of this made them valuable allies. The Byzantine emperors recruited them eagerly. They formed an elite guard, the Varangian Guard, a legendary unit made up mostly of Norse and Rus warriors, men who promised absolute loyalty, men who protected emperors from threats both within and beyond their walls. These Varangians stood watch in shining halls where every footstep echoed. They carried axes said to be sharp enough to cut through armor. They trained under golden ceilings. They guarded the emperor's chambers day and night. They fought in distant battles. They marched under banners embroidered with gold thread, and yet they remained Vikings in their hearts, far from home, yet always carrying home within them. Their service became famous, their loyalty respected, their strength feared. Some spent decades in this guard. Some returned home with unimaginable wealth, gold coins, silk garments, gemstones, stories of cities that seemed built from dreams. Some never returned at all, giving their lives in service to a distant empire. But whether they served as merchants, guards, or settlers, the Vikings in the East changed the world around them, and the world around them changed them in return. They learned the customs of the Slavic peoples. They adopted elements of their language. They married local women. They established dynasties. They ruled cities. They became nobles, princes, kings. From their line would rise new realms, new traditions, new histories. The Norse sagas speak of these journeys with admiration, not because they were violent, but because they were grand, because they were daring, because they revealed something essential about the Viking spirit, a spirit not only of war, but of movement, adaptation, exploration, trade, alliance, The Vikings heading west had found lands that softened them. The Vikings heading east found lands that empowered them, gave them purpose, gave them wealth, gave them a place in the shaping of empires. Imagine now a quiet evening on the Dnieper River. A Viking trader sits on the deck of his ship. The sun is setting behind the forests, staining the water with shades of gold and rose. His crew rests nearby, speaking softly in a mix of Norse and Slavic words. A goose calls from the reeds. The river drifts gently. The world feels wide and peaceful. He remembers the islands of the west. He remembers the fjords of his birth. He remembers the people he has met along these winding waters. And he feels something steady inside him, the understanding that his journey is not about raiding or conquering. It is about becoming part of something greater. The eastern rivers are quiet tonight, but they whisper stories of all they have carried, from merchants to warriors, from kings to wanderers. They whisper that destiny is not a straight line. It bends like a river. It flows around obstacles. It widens and narrows. It leads to places no one expects. For the Vikings, the East was such a place that transformed them, a place that saw their kindness as well as their strength, a place that welcomed their courage, a place that gave birth to realms that would shape centuries. As we close this chapter, imagine the Viking ship drifting slowly down the river. A soft breeze moves through the trees. The stars begin to appear overhead. The world is calm. The river reflects the sky like a mirror, and the ship continues forward, quiet, steady, unhurried, guided by the same spirit that carried the Vikings across oceans, islands, and empires. A spirit born in the north, a spirit carried into the west, and now flowing gently into the east. The Vikings had traveled through misty islands, across wide rivers, and into the heart of empires. They had blended with new cultures, built towns, and shaped kingdoms. But their journey was not yet complete. There were still lands waiting beyond the horizon, lands untouched, lands unknown, lands that seemed to rest at the very edge of the world. For a people shaped by curiosity and courage, the call of these distant shores was impossible to ignore, and so they sailed west, farther west than anyone had dared, into waters where maps ended, into skies that seemed larger than the imagination, into places where the sea met the sky in soft, endless silence. Their first great discovery was Iceland. Iceland appeared to them like a dream rising from the sea, a vast island of black lava cliffs and green valleys, mountains covered in snow even in summer, hot springs steaming in the cold air, rivers winding like silver threads across the land, and waterfalls tumbling from heights so great they seemed like celestial doors. The Vikings who first arrived stood in quiet awe. The land felt untouched, untamed, sacred. It was a place where nature spoke with a strong, clear voice, a place that seemed to welcome those who were brave enough to reach it. There were no kings here, no armies, no old loyalties or boundaries, just the earth, the sky, the sea, and the endless possibility of beginning again. So the Vikings stayed. And they built. They established farms along the fertile valleys. They raised sheep and cattle on the lush green plains. They fished in rivers filled with salmon. They warmed themselves near hot springs during the deep winter. They carved simple homes into the land, letting the wind, stone, and sky guide their designs. But they also built something unlike anything the world had seen, a society without kings, without castles, without tyrants, a society built on assemblies, discussion, and shared decision. This became the Althingi, the first democratic national assembly in Europe, a gathering of chieftains and free people who met in a great open field to speak of laws, settle disputes, and share news. They gathered not in a hall, but beneath the sky, in a place where the earth split into dramatic cliffs, where the wind moved freely, where every voice echoed against the ancient stones. It was a democracy born from wilderness, born from the spirit of people who believed that leadership was not inherited but earned. That wisdom belonged not to one, but to many. That truth could be found in open conversation. Around their assemblies, children played among the rocks. Women shared stories and traded goods. Men spoke calmly, even when discussing matters of great weight. It was a society woven from respect, a society shaped by the land itself. Iceland became a sanctuary, a place where Viking culture flourished in new and surprising ways. Poets emerged, skalds who crafted long, sweeping sagas, stories of gods, heroes, voyages, love, sorrow, and fate. Stories that would survive for 1,000 years, stories that still echo today. But beyond Iceland, the sea whispered of another land. A land farther west, a land colder, harsher, more demanding. This land was Greenland. The journey to Greenland was long and lonely. The sea around them grew colder. Icebergs floated like silent giants. Fog wrapped the horizon in silver veils. The wind carried the chill of distant glaciers. When the Vikings finally reached Greenland, they saw towering cliffs of ice and rocky shores carved by ancient frost. It was a land of extremes, a land where survival required skill, endurance, and a deep partnership with the environment. Yet, beneath the harshness, there was beauty. Endless skies, mountains rising like crystal walls, a silence so profound it felt like a presence, and valleys where hardy grasses and small flowers grew in the brief warmth of summer. Viking settlers established farms along the fjords. They built homes from stone and driftwood. They raised sheep, goats, and cattle. They hunted seals, walruses, and caribou. They learned to read the ice the way they once read the sea. They traded with the Inuit peoples, exchanging knowledge of the land. Life in Greenland was difficult, but it was meaningful. The settlers grew connected to the rhythms of a land that challenged them every day. They grew strong, quiet, thoughtful, resilient. Nights in Greenland were long and dark. During winter, the sun barely rose. Families gathered inside thick-walled houses, warmed by fires and wool. Children listened to sagas spoken in soft voices, stories of long voyages, lost lands, brave ancestors, and mysterious spirits. The sagas were a kind of warmth, a fire for the mind, a way to carry hope through the cold months. In these stories, one place seemed to glow brighter than the rest, a place whispered about by sailors, a place said to lie even farther west, a place where grapes grew wild and forests stretched endlessly, a place called Vinland. Vinland, the land of wine, the land of promise, the land at the very edge of the world. It was not discovered by accident. It was discovered by desire. The desire to know what lay beyond the horizon, the desire to find new land for future generations, the desire to answer the quiet call of the sea. Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red of Greenland, heard tales of this strange land from sailors blown off course, tales of forests thicker than any in the north, tales of gentle winters, tales of wild grapes and rich soil. So Leif prepared a ship. He gathered a crew. He filled the vessel with provisions, and when the winds were right, he sailed west. Days passed. Waves rose and fell. Birds circled overhead. The air grew warmer. The sea changed color. And then land, a coastline covered in golden sand, forests stretching endlessly inland, rivers flowing clear and sweet, air fragrant with unfamiliar plants. It felt like a dream. The Vikings stepped onto this new shore slowly, cautiously, reverently. They named it Vinland for its wild grapes. They built small houses. They explored the forests. They tasted new fruits. They fished in rivers filled with salmon. They felt the sun on their faces like a blessing from the gods. For a brief time, they lived in harmony with this new world. They gathered wood. They prepared food. They carved runes into stones. They told stories at night beneath a sky different from any they had ever known. But Vinland was far away, too far. It was difficult to sustain life there when supplies needed to come across vast oceans. The land was beautiful, but it was not theirs. There were people living there, indigenous tribes with their own traditions, stories, and rights to the land. Encounters with them were tense, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not. The Vikings respected their strength. They understood that staying forever might bring conflict neither side desired. So, Vinland became a memory, a bright, shining, bittersweet memory, a place touched, but not taken, a place admired, but not claimed, a place that lived on not in settlement, but in story. And perhaps that was enough. The sagas carried the tales of Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland like soft lanterns in the dark. They were not written to boast, they were written to remember, to honor the quiet bravery of those who left home to find the edge of the world, to honor the resilience of those who built farms in the shadow of glaciers, to honor the wonder of those who saw forests no Viking had ever seen before. These sagas were recited slowly, with steady voices, with long pauses, with reverence for the people who lived them. They spoke of longing, of discovery, of hardship, of awe, of the deep connection between humanity and the unknown. If you listen closely to these ancient stories, you will hear more than words. You will hear the sea, the wind brushing through Icelandic grass, the creak of wooden houses in Greenland, the distant birds of Vinland. You will hear footsteps on new shores, breath held in wonder, hearts beating with both fear and excitement. These journeys were not about conquest. They were about exploration, about understanding, about touching the edges of the map and realizing that the world was larger than anyone had imagined. The Vikings looked into that vastness and did not step back. They stepped forward, calmly, courageously, with respect for whatever lay ahead. Their legacy in these lands is quiet. No empires, no monuments, no kingdoms carved by force. Only cairns of stones, remains of houses, and memories held by the earth. Nature has folded their footsteps into itself, but their spirit remains. In the winds of Iceland, in the ice of Greenland, in the forests of Vinland. As we close this chapter, imagine a Viking standing on a cliff in Iceland, the wind lifting his hair, the ocean stretching in endless blue, the world vast and full of mystery. He breathes deeply. He feels the weight of the journey behind him. He feels the pull of the journey ahead. He feels the quiet companionship of the gods, and he smiles, because he knows that the world is wide and beautiful and worth exploring, and because he knows that even at the edge of the world, he is never alone. After long journeys to the edges of the world through misty islands, icy fjords, and newfound lands, the Vikings always return to the quiet heart of life, a heart made not of battle or conquest, but of soft, human moments, moments shaped by songs, by meals, by love, by laughter, and by silence. Moments that revealed who they truly were beneath the armor of legend. If the sea was their road, then home was their sanctuary, a place where the soul breathed differently, more slowly, more deeply, more honestly. And in these sanctuaries, the Vikings expressed the deepest parts of themselves. Let us step into that world now. Inside a longhouse, the air glows with warm firelight. Smoke drifts lazily upward through a vent in the roof. Children settle on thick furs. Women spin wool with gentle, rhythmic movements. Men returned from hunting or fishing, their clothes smelling of pine and salt. Outside, the night wind hums softly against wooden walls. This is the world where Viking poetry was born. Viking poetry was not loud. It was not recited with grand gestures. It was spoken quietly, shared by firelight, shaped by memory, held in hearts. Their poems followed old rhythms passed down from ancestors. Deep tones, strong beats, words woven like braided rope, stories wrapped inside stories. A skald, a poet, was a keeper of memory. He carried entire histories in his voice. He remembered line after line of tales stretching back generations. He performed not for applause, but for connection. He might begin with a soft chant. A hum felt more than heard. The children leaned in. The adults grew still. The fire crackled gently. And then, slowly, the skald told of ancient battles, wandering gods, lost loves, or brave journeys. His voice did not rise sharply. It drifted like smoke, each word heavy with meaning, each line shaped by care. The sagas were not meant to excite the listener. They were meant to anchor them, to remind them of where they came from, to remind them of who they were. Poetry was the soul of the Viking world, a soft pulse beneath the cold, a warmth inside the winter. Food, too, carried this quiet warmth. Their meals were simple, but full of meaning and comfort. Imagine a Viking table, a long wooden board set low to the ground, lanterns casting soft shadows, bowls carved from wood and horn, hands reaching for bread and fish, not out of urgency, but with gentle familiarity. They ate dark rye bread baked slowly on stone. Its smell filled the longhouse with earthy warmth. They ate dried fish softened in broth, seasoned with herbs gathered from summer fields. They shared stews of root vegetables, onions, and bits of meat. They drank ale brewed from barley, mild, cloudy, and warming. They drank mead made from honey, sweet, golden, and soft on the tongue. Food was more than nourishment. It was connection. It brought families together. It marked the turning of seasons. It honored the work of those who grew, hunted, gathered, and cooked. At everyday meals, conversation flowed lightly. Children spoke of their games. Women discussed weaving, dyeing, or storytelling. Men talked of fishing conditions or small repairs needed around the farm. But during feasts, the longhouses glowed. Laughter rose. Songs filled the air. Tables overflowed with what the land and sea had offered. People celebrated births, marriages, harvests, and victories big and small. These moments taught the Vikings a lesson often overlooked in their legends. That joy was found not in greatness, but in togetherness. Not in grand achievement, but in simple abundance. And from these gatherings came the quiet stirrings of love. Viking love was not always poetic. It was not always dramatic. It was something more grounded, more patient, more real. A Viking marriage was built from partnership, from shared work, from mutual respect. A man needed a woman's wisdom to survive. A woman needed a man's strength to endure. Together, they created a balance shaped by trust. Before marriage, a young man might carve small wooden gifts for the woman he admired. A comb, a bead, a tiny animal figure, quiet tokens of affection carried in his pocket for days before giving them. A young woman might weave a patterned ribbon, then slip it into his hand, meaning, "I see you," meaning, "I trust you," meaning, "I welcome your presence." When two people fell in love, it was not always filled with fire. Sometimes it was a slow, steady warmth that grew with each shared task, milking goats at dawn, repairing fences in the rain, sitting by the fire when storms howled outside. Love was built from small gestures: a bowl of warm soup, a repaired cloak, a touch on the arm, a soft smile across the longhouse. Marriage was a joining of families, a blessing of futures, a partnership meant for winter nights and summer work alike. And yet, even within love and community, loneliness lived quietly. Viking men often spent months away on journeys, raids, trading expeditions, or exploration. They sailed across seas that stretched like endless gray mirrors. They camped under foreign skies, far from the warmth of home. They slept on decks or in makeshift shelters, listening to the sea breathe in the darkness. Loneliness wrapped itself around them like cold mist. It lived in the spaces between waves. It stirred in the silence after songs faded. It pressed gently on their hearts during long, sleepless nights. They thought of the longhouses glowing with firelight back home. They pictured their wives weaving or stirring pots of broth. They imagined their children sleeping under wool blankets. They remembered the sound of familiar voices, the smell of their home's hearth, the softness of barley fields, swaying in summer breeze. Loneliness did not break them, it shaped them. It taught them patience, it taught them longing, it taught them gratitude for the loved ones waiting across the sea. When men returned home, there was always a moment at the shoreline, a moment when their ship slid quietly into the fjord, a moment when the longhouse roofs appeared between the trees, a moment when a child's voice carried faintly across the wind, a moment when a woman stood at the water's edge, shawl fluttering in the breeze, eyes searching. In this moment, the loneliness of months dissolved into warmth, into homecoming, into relief, into joy. A man stepped onto familiar soil and felt the earth embrace him. His children ran into his arms. His wife touched his face as if confirming he was real. Neighbors offered bread, ale, and laughter. The village welcomed him back into the rhythm of life. But even at home, loneliness whispered sometimes. In men who had seen distant lands, in women who waited through long winters, in children who dreamed of fathers far away. It was not a heavy loneliness. It was a soft one, a reminder of how vast the world was, a reminder of how fragile connection could be, a reminder that every reunion was precious. In these quiet spaces of life between love and longing, poetry blossomed, songs rose, stories deepened, food tasted sweeter, friendship grew. Friendship was essential in Viking life. Not a luxury, a necessity. A friend was someone you relied on during storms, someone who watched your back in battle, someone who shared warmth during winter, someone who held your secret fears, someone who stood beside you in moments of both danger and celebration. Friendship carried immense honor. It was woven into their laws, their songs, and their values. Breaking a friendship was seen as a wound to the soul. Keeping a friendship was a sign of great character, and honor was the foundation beneath all of it. Honor was not about pride, it was about truth, about doing what was right when no one was watching, about protecting the weak, about speaking honestly, about respecting one's ancestors, about living in a way that would make future generations proud. Honor shaped how they loved, how they fought, how they traveled, how they told stories, how they forgave, how they died. A Viking could endure hunger, cold, fear, and loneliness. But to lose honor, to betray trust, or break an oath was unbearable. So they lived carefully, not cautiously, but conscientiously. They valued reputation not for ego, but for belonging, for identity, for legacy. This deep sense of honor wove together every part of Viking life. It lived in their poems, it lived in their meals, it lived in their love, it lived in their friendships, it lived in their loneliness. It lived in their dreams. Dreams shaped them more than steel ever could. A Viking dreamed of safe journeys, of warm homes, of green summer fields, of children laughing, of loved ones thriving, of gods watching gently from the sky. Dreams softened the hard edges of life. They gave meaning to long nights at sea. They offered courage when dangers grew near. They kept the heart warm when the world felt cold. When a Viking man stood alone on the deck of a ship beneath the stars, he felt all these layers of life within him. The songs of his ancestors, the warmth of meals shared with family, the touch of his wife, the laughter of his friends, the ache of loneliness, the pride of honor, the quiet strength of belonging, the longing for home. And as the waves carried him forward, he whispered to the night, a prayer, a memory, a promise, because he knew that life was not measured by battles, but by the softness between them, not by how far he sailed, but by who waited at the shore, not by the strength of his arm, but by the depth of his heart. This is the true soul of the Viking people, a soul built from poetry, food, love, friendship, loneliness, and honor. A soul far gentler than the stories often tell. A soul that still echoes today in the wind across northern seas, in the patterns carved on wood, in the sagas whispered beside fires, in the hearts of those who carry Norse blood, and in the hearts of those who simply admire their quiet bravery. As we close this chapter, imagine a Viking longhouse at night. The fire burns low. Children sleep in warm furs. A woman hums an ancient tune. A man sits silently, sharpening a small tool, not thinking of war, but of home. Outside, snow falls softly. The gods watch closely. The world rests. Inside, the soul of a people lives on quiet, steady, full of stories, full of love, full of longing, full of honor, and always full of song. There comes a moment in every story when the tide turns, when the wind that once pushed the sails forward grows gentle, when the world shifts, quietly but irrevocably. And for the Vikings, that moment arrived slowly, not with thunder, not with defeat, but with the soft steps of change. For centuries, they had journeyed across seas, built homes in distant lands, blended with foreign cultures, and shaped worlds far beyond their northern fjords. They had carried stories, crafts, courage, and dreams into every corner they touched. But eventually, the world around them transformed. And as the world changed, so did they. The end of the Viking Age was not a collapse, it was a settling, a gentle lowering of the sail, a shifting from movement to root, from wandering to belonging, from discovery to creation. To understand why the Viking Age ended, we must look at the quiet forces that guided it. The first force was integration. The Vikings had settled in so many lands: England, Ireland, Scotland, Iceland, Greenland, Normandy, the Baltic states, the rivers of Russia, that they slowly became part of those worlds. They married local women, raised children who spoke blended languages, built farms, towns, and churches. Their descendants grew up with mixed traditions. Norse blood flowed alongside Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, Slavic, and Frankish blood. They were no longer outsiders. They were neighbors, citizens, protectors, participants in the everyday life of the lands they once approached with caution. Their swords were no longer needed for survival. Their oars no longer carried them to unknown shores. Instead, they carried grain, fish, trade goods, letters, gifts. The second force was change. Europe was transforming. Kingdoms grew stronger. Armies became more organized. Fortresses were built. Cities fortified their walls. Christianity spread across northern and western Europe, reshaping beliefs, laws, and cultures. The Vikings did not resist this change for long. Many embraced Christianity, not as enemies of their old gods, but as people who recognized that the world was shifting. They adapted with the same quiet intelligence that had guided them across oceans. Church bells began to ring in villages once dedicated to Odin. Crosses were carved beside runes. Priests and skalds shared space at the same hearth. Old stories continued, but new ones were added. Faith did not erase identity, it blended with it. The third force was nation building. As Viking chieftains settled and blended into local societies, they became leaders not only of clans but of territories. They organized laws, they built alliances, they formed the foundations of kingdoms. In Scandinavia, local tribes united under central rulers. Kings emerged in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Kings who no longer led fleets of raiders, but armies of citizens. Kings who no longer sought treasure across the sea, but prosperity at home. Kings who built nations instead of expeditions. The Viking Age matured into the Scandinavian kingdoms we know today. Meanwhile, in France, the descendants of Viking settlers formed a powerful Duchy Normandy, named for the Northmen. Their leader, William the Conqueror, a man of Viking blood, would cross the Channel in 1066 and reshape the destiny of England. His victory brought Norse influence into English law, language, and culture in ways that still endure today. And in the east, the Rus, descendants of Viking traders and warriors, they established cities like Novgorod and Kiev. They became princes, rulers, founders of what would one day become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Their legacy lived in the names of rivers, towns, dynasties, and stories. The Vikings were no longer merely travelers, they were builders of realms. The fourth force behind the end of the Viking Age was prosperity. When people have enough, they no longer need to risk everything. Raiding had been born from scarcity, from harsh winters, from poor soil, from hunger. But with trade routes stretching across Europe and Asia, with fertile lands in Iceland and the British Isles, with farms thriving and cities growing, the Vikings no longer needed to seek wealth through danger. Wealth came to them. Safely, steadily, naturally. And so, little by little, the longships rested more often on shore. Their sails remained furled, their oars gathered dust. Children grew up seeing their fathers farm instead of raid. Communities expanded. Peace spread. Eventually, the Viking Age faded like twilight, giving way to dawn. But fading does not mean forgetting. The Vikings left behind more than footprints on distant shores. They left behind a legacy still alive today. Their languages shaped the English tongue. Words like sky, window, knife, husband, anger, trust, law, and fellow. Simple words, everyday words, spoken casually by millions of people who do not realize they are speaking echoes of the Norse. Their sense of law influenced modern systems. Their democratic assembly in Iceland, the Alþingi, became a model for collective decision-making. Their storytelling shaped literature. Their sagas preserved history with poetic grace. Their art left patterns of interlocking lines that still decorate jewelry, clothing, and buildings. Their shipbuilding techniques inspired centuries of seafaring design. Even their values remain familiar: honesty, courage, respect for nature, strength in adversity, equality between men and women. These values still pulse through Scandinavian societies today. And their spirit, the quiet, steady, curious spirit that carried them across oceans, still lives in the people of the North, in their resilience, in their calm determination, in their love of wilderness, in their understated strength. Walk through Norway, Denmark, Sweden, or Iceland today, and you will feel the echo of the past, in the way people greet each other with warmth despite the cold, in the design of their homes, simple, elegant, shaped by nature, in their love for stories, old and new, in their respect for fairness and community, in their connection to land, sea, and sky. The Vikings did not disappear. They transformed. They dissolved into the world they helped shape. Their sagas became part of global heritage. Their descendants became farmers, fishers, kings, artisans, explorers, scientists, poets, and thinkers. Their legacy flows quietly across continents like a long, winding river. But their ending, the closing of the Viking Age, was not an ending at all. It was a sunrise, a dawn of new nations, a dawn of cultures intertwined, a dawn of peace replacing necessity, a dawn of stories carried forward by memory rather than movement. Imagine the final years of the Viking Age. A longship rests on the shore, its hull weathered but strong, its dragon-head prow watching the horizon like an old guardian. Once, men ran across the sand to climb aboard. Now, grass grows gently around its frame. Children play nearby, unaware of the voyages this ship once carried. A farmer tends his fields. A woman draws water from a well. A priest rings a bell, calling for evening prayer. The world is quieter, softer, more rooted. An old Viking walks toward the ship, his hair silver, his steps slow. He runs his hand along the wood. He remembers storms, stars, distant lands, and the faces of men who shared those journeys. He smiles gently, not with sadness, but with gratitude. He knows that his world has changed. He knows that the sea, once calling him outward, now calls him to rest. He turns toward his home, toward the firelight glowing softly through the doorway, toward his grandchildren playing on the floor, toward his wife weaving in the corner. The Viking Age has ended, but his life continues, quiet, simple, full. Across Europe, from Normandy to Russia, from Iceland to the British Isles, the descendants of Vikings wake each morning to plow fields, build homes, trade in markets, sing lullabies, and tell stories. Stories of gods, of journeys, of courage, of love. Stories of people who crossed oceans not for glory, but for possibility. Stories that shaped nations. Stories that still drift through the world like soft waves. And now, as we end this final chapter, imagine the dawn rising over a northern fjord. Light touches the mountains. Mist melts into the sea. A longship rests quietly near the shore. The world inhales. The world exhales. The world remembers. The Vikings are gone, yet they remain, in stories, in names, in languages, in traditions, in the quiet strength of the people who walk those shores today. Their ships may no longer cut across the waves, but their spirit continues to move, soft, steady, endless, like the tide returning to the shore. And as the morning sun rises over the calm water, our story ends with a whisper. Though their ships no longer sail the sea, their stories still drift on.